Hello again. Session 12 this time, case taking. There are 5 different sections in this, but let's start off by looking at the types of healthcare forms. Well, in clinical practice, we use quite a number of different client healthcare forms. The most common ones are the client history form. The client history form gives you a good idea. The client fills in exactly what their history of their health issue or their current problem or their health in general is all about. The initial interview or case-taking form, so where you actually sit down with the client, you take their case and you record that. And then a follow-up history or case-taking form. So they come in the first time, then they come back the second time, and the second time there are facilities for, or there are the ability to record whether there's been progress made in the condition. Other types of forms that may be used include a sign-in sheet, maybe, a current general wellness form, just to give you an idea the type of lifestyle that these people, that your client might be living. Client perceived obstacles to wellness form. So how does the client perceive their own health and how they can do something about it, and whether indeed there are obstacles or they perceive obstacles. A physical examination form, a pain discomfort chart, what's called ASTA charts, or an allergy log. So let's have a look. Let's have a little look. We'll go ahead and have a look at some of these things. So the basics of a client history form include the name, but you must of course obtain client consent before you fill out anything that remains in your records, one of your records. So you get the client's consent first, their address, date of birth, their marital status or their partnership status, children, and whether the children belong to that particular partnership. Contact details, very important, very important. Email can be very useful, but if for any reason you can't be at your clinic that day and you need to contact clients, or you need to contact a client with a report that you've made, or there's all sorts of reasons why you need contact details. Their occupation, that can tell you a lot, how they spend most of their day, whom they were referred by, their current doctor and his or her contact details, any radiological results, for example, x-rays, what their presenting problem is, so what are they coming to see you for, their current history, that is what's happening in terms of, you elaborate on those symptoms and on the issue that they presented with, and what they get a current history picture. Past history, what's happened in their past, including operations, including medications, including health conditions, including illnesses, childhood illnesses, and so on. The onset of this particular presenting symptom or issue. Any previous assessments by anybody else, that needs to be recorded. Any previous treatment. So previous assessments, I'll just go back to that, could include a diagnosis, which doesn't necessarily have to be your diagnosis. So in other words, there might be a standing diagnosis, but you might see that in a different way. However, always good to have a previous assessment, a previous treatment, the current practitioner's treatment, if they're working with somebody else, any contraindicators for their illness, so what makes it worse, aggravates it, what is contraindicated for them in the condition, in the current condition that they have, any pain, and so with pain you need to know the location of the pain, you need to know where it refers to. So location can location can be quite specific and it can be written down. Sometimes on some client forms you might even have a little diagram, and so you just put a little spot with an X in it, which can give it to you where it refers to. In other words, does the pain move? Does it refer to another place in the body? The type of the pain, is it intense, burning, stabbing, dull, chronic? What aggravates the pain? Sitting, standing, heat, cold. And it's offset by, it's offset by walking or by sitting for long periods of time, etc., etc. Okay, so you've already got a huge amount of information there and lots to work with. Allergies. Are there any allergies currently that the person is aware of, and what those allergies are? Activities. What sort of activities do they regularly engage in? Any medications that they're on, very important to have a list of the medications that they're on. Client preferences, whether they like music, whether they like conversation, or what in general they like. This gives just a brief overview of who's sitting in front of you, what the feel for that person. A brief mission statement which at the bottom of your client history form, which ensures that you let the client know when they read through it and they're filling in the form that you adhere in your practice to relevant legislation. I very often also put in a little sentence saying to them that none of their information will be disclosed to anybody except under certain conditions or certain circumstances. For example, if it's required by a court of law, or in the event of the death or severe injury of the. I'll say that the other way around. Severe injury or death of the severe injury of the person, which would require some history, or the death of the person. So that just lets people know that what they disclose to you stays in the room, and space for the client to sign to affirm informed consent. And they will have read the brief statement. Okay, so have a look at online practice management systems. Now, online practice management systems can be very useful. They also have another side where you're working with a computer instead of relating to them. So we've talked about this before, earlier on when we're looking at practice management. But just have a little look. www.mypractice.com.au or www.powerdiary.com.au. So here's an activity. Check on the websites that you just saw in the previous slide, in this slide 4, and browse through the different management systems. Note how different they are, and in your own time, complete a trial run. Note that of the two, ownership of www.mypractice.com is allowed. You're allowed to own it. Read and discuss Weir M, your textbook, 2011, page 50 to 53, which covers information on client records. Okay, so next we'll look at follow-up client interview forms. So a follow-up form, follow-up client interview form, which is a consultation form, is used in case taking for all subsequent client attendances after the initial consultation treatment. So clearly, the second time a client comes, you don't have to go through the longer or more lengthy first interview process, which means that However, there are certain things that you need to understand and know. You need to know things like whether there was any relief from the presenting symptoms or the presenting problem, whether it changed or not, whether it's become worse. There's a whole lot of things that you need to know. That's what this interview form will do. So it's usually less voluminous than the initial client interview form, and this is because obviously most of the relevant client information would have been recorded and captured from the client at the client's first visit, and there's a reduction in the historical focus because we're not going back into history, checking out. You've already established the pattern of health and wellness of that person, or the pattern of disease and illness of that person. So what you're doing now is more formally focusing on the presenting symptoms, what the current history was. So you're concentrating on the current situation. Okay, client sign-in sheets. Now, these can be helpful. A sign-in, sign-out sheet can be helpful in two areas of case taking. It can verify the date and time a client visited a clinic, good for records, for treatment or consultation. It can confirm inconsistencies in the evidence of a client should litigation ensue. So in a lot of ways, it's something that assists you. Well, it does. It assists you enormously in knowing exactly what the movements of your clients are. And should you be called for litigation, then you've got it there. You've got it there. And it shows good protocol and good clinic management skills. Medical practices and hospitals are all required to have sign-in forms so that they can keep a track of people who come and go. And it's optional for a natural health practitioner. However, it is considered to be a safe thing to do. Okay, let's have a look at some case taking. Case taking is an effective art. It's an art that requires study and above all practice. So with any case taking, you need to be aware of three major areas, three aspects that are really important: the legal aspect, the ethical aspect, and the business aspect. So sometimes the lines, there's a little rejoinder here that says that sometimes the lines between all three aspects can be blurred and there's a bit of an overlap. But any prudent practitioner, as a careful practitioner, you will understand and know and be careful in all aspects of case taking, because you don't want anything at all to lead to legal action against you for malpractice or negligence, and reporting of the client to any of the regulatory bodies. And look, whilst that's not necessarily likely to happen, and we shouldn't actually let that overshadow our case taking, it's very important to keep that in mind, that at any point in time, should anything go wrong, then your case taking skills might come into question. Have a look at handout 1 and 2, and also have a look at the samples in the readings folder for week 12. Really, it's a very good idea to follow up what we're talking about here with that relevant reading, because it is extending and expanding what you need to know. So let's have a look at case taking legal requirements. There are regulations do vary between states and territories, but all healthcare providers and facilities owe a legal duty of care to their patients, and that's first and foremost. You have a legal duty of care to your clients. Once you set up practice, you're setting up as a qualified practitioner, therefore you have a legal duty of care. So, legal areas of consideration stemming from case taking include the following. You need to ensure that your clients are safe. in terms of all infection control measures. So a client, if they come to your clinic and due to some clumsiness or some ineptitude or some lack of taking precautions, your client contracts an infectious disease, you could be in trouble. You need to know these things. You need to make sure that you always disclose risks to your clients verbally, if needs to be on paper, in your if you want to put it into your original case taking form. Notification of harm to regulatory agencies and to government bodies. So if something goes wrong, you need to disclose that to regulatory bodies. Disclosure of information to regulatory agencies and government bodies, for example, for notifiable diseases, and mandatory reporting of child abuse. So if you notice and you recognise that a client comes in with a notifiable disease, then it's in your interest. In actual fact, you're not required, I beg your pardon, I'm going to say it again. You are required to legally notify, but particularly in cases of reporting child abuse, and it's in your interest to do so. Avoid any action or advice that could lead to a charge of holding out to be a medical practitioner. So never, ever, ever make false claims or make claims that elevate you to a standing, a practitioner standing that you do not have qualifications for. You can be in trouble for that. So always make it very clear to your client exactly what your position is and what your qualifications are. Good idea to have your qualification certificates up on the wall. If there's any question, point them to the qualification forms. Make sure always that confidentiality, except in certain cases, as in under legal constraint from a court, or under client consent to exchange records with another practitioner. Make sure that you maintain confidentiality. It is your legal duty of care to do so. And if a client comes to you and discloses something to you which has disclosed to somebody, to nobody else, and you inadvertently or even advertently let it slip to a family member, no, can't do it. Confidentiality and privacy. See weeks 3 and 4, we talked about that in detail. And also see issues around consent, because we've covered that, we've already covered that. So, okay, let's have a look at a couple of activities. Or sorry, your second activity. So we're going to, if you're through your forum, I encourage you to find students who are currently studying this subject online who come from the same modality as yourself. Okay, so through the forum, you should be able to do that. Ask them to discuss the forms in the reading folder. Get them to think about how their client forms might differ. And then what really works about these sample forms and what might be different in different modalities and why. Because there are pro formas which might work for one modality but don't work for another. And they, of course, when you're in practice, you are generating and creating your own client history form, but you can use the models that are there for you. But remember, you have to adjust it and adapt it according to the to your own requirements and the information that you want. Okay, we'll look at session 2 next. Thank you.